Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dawn Genvy. I'm a research manager in the patient and public involvement team at NIHR. Welcome to the first in a series of webinars focusing on PPI in action. Today's presentation is focused on co-production for research with impact. Before the presentation, I'm going to run you through some general housekeeping rules. You can enable captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of the presentation of the webinar. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button and click type here. Select send anonymously if you don't want to have your name displayed. Once you finish typing your question, click send. Please use this function throughout, and I'll raise the questions at the end for the team to answer. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand you over to Dr. Katie Featherstone.
Hi, thanks, Dawn. It's great to be here today with the team. We're going to talk to you about co-production for research with a focus on improving the care for people living with dementia. We've got a lot of the team here today, including the researchers, our PPI applicants, and our leads for PPI engagement today. I'm going to start off by just telling you, before I introduce you to the team, telling you a bit about why this is important. The care of people with dementia is really, really important. And a key focus for us is around hospital care. So why hospital care? Well, people with dementia are one of the largest populations within our hospitals, occupying between 25 and 50% of all our acute wards. And they're typically arriving for urgent, unscheduled care, usually with a potentially preventable but also treatable condition. So, for example, arriving with pneumonia, sepsis, UTI. So it's a preventable and treatable condition. They're not there because of their dementia. But in arriving to hospital, they're at really high risk of poor care quality and poor experiences of care, to the extent that an admission can really increase our risk of deterioration and institutionalization, and a really higher risk of death. So people with dementia are going into hospital with treatable conditions, but actually in this setting, they're really deteriorating. So a focus for us is we really need to understand why that's happening. Important to people. Really important to people, but are really under-researched, but also really aren't on the agenda, or are things that have been discussed by the NHS, by NHS leaders, by ward teams, by politicians, and also really hasn't been in the public domain, the public agenda as well. So we've focused on things like resistance to care, continence care, really vital to people, and also talking about restrictive practice, restraint in care, really hidden aspects of care. We're also moving on to some new areas. We're looking at specific populations as well who are really at high risk of poor care and poor experiences and poor outcomes. So looking at the experiences of African and African Caribbean communities are really high risk of poor care. And also people who are admitted to mental health wards who have dementia, but are also at risk to themselves and others. So that's our programme of work. I'm going to hand you over to Meg now, who's led our programme of PPI. Meg, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I wanted to initially start off by giving you an overview, really, of our approaches to PPI work. And then as the presentation goes on, I'll talk a bit more about how we've worked with different organisations and individuals, and then some of the different approaches that we've developed. Within our PPI approach, we aim to provide deep understandings into the points on screen. So what are people living with dementia's experiences and perspectives of care? What values and standards of care do people think need to be prioritised? What do people think is good practice and training? And also, what training do people think is needed to get that good practice? And we've also invested a lot of time on approaches which are inclusive and which promote diversity, which leads me on to the next slide. So a key aim of ours has been to really support inclusion and diversity. and to promote the voices of people from a wide range of different cultures, religions, communities, different backgrounds. But obviously, that's a really vast area. And so within that, as Katie touched on before, there's been a particular focus on working with specific communities and groups of people living with dementia. So we now have numerous established groups where we work with people living with young onset dementia. We've done a lot of work with older people from African and African Caribbean communities, people living with dementia from different South Asian backgrounds, and also deaf people living with dementia. So they've been our key areas of focus, really. Just before I move on as well, I thought it would be nice to give you a bit of a context to what you're looking at. So all of the photographs of artworks in this presentation have all been created by people living with dementia or care partners of people living with dementia. And I'll go on to talk about the use of arts in our work, but I just thought it'd be nice for you to know what you're looking at. So as an overview, we think it's really important to work with people in different ways and to be really creative in developing approaches to PPI work and to be flexible. And within that, what we found is it's really important to develop new approaches which support communication in different ways. So there isn't just a reliance on verbally communicating with people. So next slide, please. So we've worked with people in advisory groups, supporting expression through the arts, and different community engagement events, which I'll talk a bit more about now. So outreach has been really key to our approach, and we have spent a lot of time in working with organisations and individuals to develop really grounded and really mutually beneficial relationships. And a lot of that has been looking at how can we support organisations and individuals in practical ways. So a key way we've done that is to develop outreach events and to work with people to develop and deliver these. So some of the examples of what we've done are on screen. Dementia-friendly operas, calypso dances, art workshops. We've been really kind of divergent in our thinking with that. And yeah, we've done a whole range of things. I think something else that's important to note is it's not always appropriate to immediately go into an organisation or work with an individual and discuss specific topics. So in the case of the project that I've been working on, it's the use of restrictive practices. So what we've done is through working on this outreach over time, sort of trust has developed, people have got to know us, we've got to know them. And then from that, findings relating to the research emerge. But it's taken, it's been a kind of constant process really, but outreach has definitely been a key part of what we've done. So I'll pass you back now to Katie and Rosie, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the use of arts later.
Rosie, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Hello, everybody. My name's Rosie Tope, and I am here today with a sort of a triple hat on, really. Just a little about me. I've got a nursing background, a very long nursing background, and subsequent academia with a lot of research as project lead, etc., etc. And I always thought I knew and understood dementia. That was until my now late husband developed dementia, and I started to live with dementia as the prime carer. And I was absolutely stunned at what happens, why, and when. So with Katie, I'm here as the carer person living with dementia, along with Andy, that you'll meet in a minute, to tell you about how I got involved in this. I've known Katie a long time now. It's well over 10 years since we first got together and sort of brainstormed. Katie had these ideas and she wanted to access a group of primary carers, of people with dementia, family members, etc., which I was able to instigate, which rapidly turned into lunches on a regular basis. And we produced a number of really impressive, wonderful studies, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm getting a bit old now, so I was stepping back, other people are taking over. So Kate thought she'd actually keep me hooked in by appointing me as chair of the Project Oversight and Management Committee, which has been, it was a privilege to accept that invitation, but it has been extremely informative as well. And so briefly, I just want to say what it means and how it works. And the team that you are looking at the moment, or some of the members of the team that are actually doing the research, are reporting to us, giving us an update. It was twice a year was the setup for this, but with the opportunity of being able to be in contact at any one time. The major lesson for me, and I think for everybody, is the importance of all working together in partnership and having full confidence in each other. So, for example, yes, we have the meetings, of course we do, and we go through the routine agenda, but Katie has always felt that she can phone me to raise an issue. I can phone her to raise a concern if that I'd like to discuss at our subsequent meeting. And it has worked, I think we can agree, Kate, beautifully. So we've had a few challenges on this a particular project, which has been able to be resolved by following the protocols that are set, all coming to a consensus and all moving forward. And so the thing is, the lesson being, don't wait for 6 months until the next meeting. Sometimes there is a need to have extraordinary meetings, and the whole process is done very well. And I, for one, have learnt enormously, and I think the team and Katie in particular would agree that they have too. So in future, for ongoing projects, etc., we will know what we're supposed to do and do it very happily. It's been an absolute privilege, and I'd like to say, I can't see anybody out there, but I know there's a number of you there. If you're given the opportunity to take on a role like this, it's a challenge, a privilege, a joy when you're working with a team that is so cohesive. I think that's all I need to say, Kate, isn't it?
Thank you, Rosie. That's really beautiful. And also I think for me, it's the long-term relationships that is the power, but also the wisdom and expertise. All the people we work with who have lived experience, they have so much knowledge in so many other areas, not just dementia, that I really think we've benefited so much from our team of PPI experts.
Absolutely.
And so thank you, Rosie. And I'll move on to invite Andy to tell his story and our collaboration. Andy, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I am actually living with dementia. I have vascular dementia. And prior to that, I guess my story is that I was the director of a European multinational company for some considerable time. Post-diagnosis, everything changed for me. My emphasis went from legal and business to dementia and patient-centered care. And that became my interest. I have been a carer for my mother. Now I am cared for. I am a researcher, and also I lecture on person-centered care and what it's like living with dementia. And I do research evaluation, so I'm looking at studies and evaluating them. The most important thing, I think, in any research is co-production. And PPI is a really good thing to be involved in. And I'd like to compliment really the people that I've worked with, Katie and her team, and the rest of us, simply because I feel that the relationship that I have managed to have with the steering group has been a relationship of equals, and I really mean that. I may not have the clinical expertise that many of the team have, but I think lived experience is of as much value as the other elements of evaluating dementia. I've been able to, through my networking, not just talk about my own experience of dementia, but because I talk to other people with dementia, I've been able to speak as a voice for them as well. So it hasn't been, although it's my lived experience, it hasn't just been my story. I've been able to provide information that I've picked up by networking with other people with dementia. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks so much. And what's great is the steering group that Andy's on, it's coming to a close, but Rosie and Andy are continuing to work with us in developing the next phase of the project. What are we going to do with the findings? That co-production is really, really important. And now we're going to, if I can find my cursor, we're going to move on to Shadreck, who's going to give us a little vignette of the work that he's doing in PPI and involving people.
Thanks very much, Katie. So I work as part of a team. I'm one of the researchers in the team, doing part of what the work that Katie has already introduced. So part of what I tried to focus on, or my focus in the work, is pretty much looking at working with communities that are at higher risk of receiving poor quality care, but also at higher risk of being marginalized or being, forgotten in the story, in the conversations that we're having about improving care. And one of the things that we really focus on in our work is about building long-term relationships with communities. And we do this by, first of all, thinking about identifying organizations within our catchment areas or within the spaces that we work, that we could partner with, that could support our work, and we could support the work that they do. And through that, begin to think of ways of engaging more and more people in our research. And when we're talking about long-term relationships, the aim is, I think Meg pointed to this, the aim is to build trust with communities, and trust is really, really important for us. What we do not want to do in our work is to show up and ask people questions and then walk away, but is to think of long-term ways of working together to create mutually beneficial relationships, but also having people's trust in what we do, but also for them to be able to tell us their experiences and their stories, rather than being the researcher that just shows up and then walks away. And so through that, over the past few years, we've developed a program of outreach to working mostly with African and African Caribbean communities in London and part of the Southeast through engagement activities, be they sort of celebration of last year we had the Windrush celebration, and then we have a tea party. We have another event coming up over the festive season where we bring older people from the community together to celebrate them. And it's not always about collecting data, but it's about listening to people and spending time with people in these communities. And through this program of work, what we have done is we have been able to develop what we would call community champions, identifying people that are able to connect us with other people in the community, and they speak for us or on our behalf in many ways. Through that, we've also developed what I would call a PPI advisory group that we meet with every month to have conversations around our research. The meetings are mostly an hour. They can be online or in person over, for as long as they want to be. No one is committed for life. They can come in and go out of these groups as they wish and contribute what they can as and when they're able to, but also identifying and appreciating their contributions. We've been also through this way of engaging with communities, we've also been able to identify the issues that are really important to people. Through listening to them, we've been able to identify and co-produce research. I think Katie has pointed to that in her introductory slide, that we have a study that we're starting in the new year that developed from regular conversations with people about an existing project, but through that, we're also having conversations around other things they would like to see examined and explored. And through that, again, in people seeing the process through from beginning to end, in looking at the relationship we have built with them and seeing sort of studies developing and us having conversations around outputs and the things that we're seeing going forward, that has been very central to what we have to do. So in a way, this is sort of an overview of the kind of work that we're doing. There's more examples of what we do on our website, I think. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Shadreck. That's a great example of working with specific communities. And I'm going to hand you back now to Meg.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work that we've done within our PPI programme has been using the arts to support involvement. So just to give you sort of a bit of a background, my background is in the arts, and in particular painting. And I've sort of developed a really keen interest into how can painting provide new lines of communication and engagement for people living with dementia. So it's looking at things that don't necessarily rely on the ability or need to be able to verbally communicate. So over the past few years, I've delivered 18 arts workshops, both group and individual arts workshops, across a range of different settings. And within that, I've worked with the settings kind of on more than one occasion. I think what's important to note with these as well is every workshop is always about supporting people to express themselves in a way that is personal to them. So it's never about kind of having a preconceived idea. For example, today we're going to paint a landscape scene. It's always about trying to give people the space and the opportunity to express themselves in a way that they want to. Something else that I always do is quite often I'll paint alongside people. And again, it's just about trying to find those non-verbal lines of connection and support. So what have we found out from this approach? Why has it worked, and how have we used it within our PPI programme of work? So firstly, I think something which is important is for some people living with dementia, verbal communication can be difficult or not possible. So it's really important within PPI work to try and find new and non-verbal routes of expression. And it creates a far more inclusive approach. I think something else kind of on that line is some topics are really hard to talk about. And it can be really difficult for people to say, recall a memory or talk about an experience. And so what we found is painting offers an alternate route to that expression. I think something else as well, kind of on that theme, is when you're painting, it can provide quite a good balance. So say if somebody's talking about something that is quite traumatic or they find very difficult, they might be painting something which makes them feel more positive, and that creates more of a balance to the topic, and it stops it from just being about that person speaking about a particular thing. It's very fluid. I think something else is that some of the symptoms associated with dementia, such as anxiety or confusion, can mean that some people are excluded from more standard PPI work, or they may find elements challenging. So whereas I've just sort of touched on the fluid nature of painting, it's a really fluid and immersive process, and you can express yourself through, say, more articulated thoughts, but you can also express yourself through more abstract expressions. So, for example, we all do it. You might paint a blue waved line, and you don't know why you've done that. You've just had an impulse to do it. You don't need to verbally articulate why that is, but it's still a really valid form of expression. And so what we've found is you can use those two things in conjunction with each other. So you can use articulated thoughts and also abstract expressions. And what that does, it just keeps a really nice kind of gentle rolling momentum with people's expressions. Whereas if you were, say, relying on just verbal communication in an interview, for some people that there's more barriers with that. So through doing this, sort of over time, we've really developed new understandings, and we've sort of now got a lot of rich data. So for the last slide, I wanted to show you an example of a painting and the types of things that we've learned from that. So it was quite hard because we've now got an archive of over 100 paintings, and each one of those artworks embodies a lot of knowledge. So it was quite difficult to just pick one and talk about it on one slide, but hopefully it will give you an idea about the types of things that we've learned through this process. So the picture that you can see on the screen was created by a person living with dementia, and they really wanted to communicate their experiences of being physically restrained whilst in hospital. And they spoke a lot about this experience and how they'd found it extremely traumatic. They were very frightened, and it was something that was still impacting them, even though, time had passed. However, within that, they also spoke about the importance of a care professional who just happened to walk into the room whilst this situation was occurring. And this care professional had walked over to them and rubbed their back. And this participant who I was working with spoke a lot about kind of the real positive significance of that person and how for them they felt that that had been the thing that had really supported them to feel calmer and to get through the situation. So how did that link to the painting? So firstly, they used direct expressions of colour. So for them, they associated the colours of reds and oranges with the feelings that they'd experienced during this restrictive practice. And again, associations of colour are all personal. We all have them and associate things with different feelings. But for them, it was reds and oranges, and they expressed that through the painting. They then used sort of blues and greens around the outside to depict the fact that time had moved on. And although it was something that they still found very difficult, the feelings weren't as intense as they had been. And they also kind of included this care professional who'd supported them. They used direct expressions of shapes. So to them, they associated this experience with imagery of a demon. And that's what they portrayed in kind of the central space of their work. As well as that, they had a lot of time where they were just immersed in the process. They weren't talking, they moved the paint around, and they were more abstract kind of expressions, very much in the moment. And so you can see there how those kind of two different articulated expressions and then more abstract expressions work together. So through this process and through working with this person, on sort of more than one occasion, we worked with them consistently, we developed a really deep and rich understanding into, what had their experiences been, what was important to them, what had been the role of their care partner, what did they want to happen going forward. And so over time, we developed, a really deep understanding into that. And I think as well, Shadreck touched on it before, but I think a real important part of this approach has been to just give people the space and time to express themselves in a way that they want to and get to know people. And I think it can be quite difficult sometimes when you're working on a project, you have a set number of sort of years or months, and you feel like you have to get certain types of knowledge within PPI work. But I think just through giving people the space and having a gentle approach to working with them, you can get kind of really interesting and rich understandings and ways of working. So I think we're back to Katie now.
Okay, thank you so much, Meg. That was fantastic. And I think I just want to end with a few, I suppose, the learnings as a team from our approach. And I think the key things that we would say is reach out and go out and meet people. For us, that was central. Don't expect people to come into your university or come in and talk to you. You've got to go out and meet people. As I did 10 years ago, going out to meet Rosie and have tea and cake with her and her group, that's how we built relationships. It's going out and meeting people, having lunches, having teas, running events that are inclusive and bring people together is at the heart of everything we do. And I really, really encourage you all to do that. It's about long-term relationships, investing your time in understanding people. You can learn so much from their knowledge, their expertise in so many ways. So for me, I think that's all I can say, in that, just get out there and do it. The more you do it, the more actually your research will benefit from the richness of all the people out there who have an amazing knowledge to contribute. Thank you. And if you want to get in touch, we're at GIAM, the Geller Institute of Aging and Memory. Just get in touch with us, and I'll hand you back to Dawn.
Thank you, Katie. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you to everybody in the team. I just wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming events that are part of this webinar series. So we've got one on the 27th of November and the 12th of December, and further details will be sent to you shortly, and it will be advertised in the same places as this one was. We'll also be sending out an evaluation form after today's webinar. So we'd appreciate it and be very grateful if you could complete that and send it back to us. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to the Q&A. I can see that we've got a few questions in here, so we'll try to answer as many as we can. We start at the top. So somebody's asked if they'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint slides. Is that something that we can do, Katie? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
The next question is, you mentioned doing outreach. Were there existing groups, or was funding available to set up outreach activities?
Does anybody want to answer that? Andy, over to you.
It depends what we've done. So Katie and I have been sort of doing this with the help of Rosie and her group for 10 years. Some of it, the dementia-friendly cinema, was originally just finding a local cinema that we could work with, sending emails around, knocking on doors. Other things we've been lucky enough to get funding from NIHR, from our institution, from other funders, but an awful lot of it has just been, I always call it, it's the challenge Annika mode. You suddenly have 2 weeks free in the year, and you you start running around and you think you've thought of a nice, easy task, and it turns out to be the busiest 2 weeks of your life. But it's, yeah, that's the way it goes.
Thanks, Andy. The next question is, do you have any tips for a sole PhD researcher to build relationships and networks with potential individuals/groups with a view to PPI involvement, bearing in mind limited resources and time to collaborate on outreach type projects?
Oh, who would like to answer that one? I mean, I would go back to if you haven't got much funds, I would always say, go out and meet people, have cups of tea, meet for coffees, just get out there and meet people with lived experience and understand their experiences. Rosie, over to you.
One of the things that I can suggest is that, having supervised a lot of research myself, but also been on the end of the line to people that have asked exactly that sort of question, I can recommend that go to a relevant charity, for example, like the Alzheimer's Society. They have always got avenues you can go to. Somebody came to me who was actually a carer of somebody with dementia. And I happened to be a trustee of Carers UK at the time. And I said, I will raise it there. And there were people falling over themselves with questions. I mean, you could be researching for the next 1,000 years and never answer all the questions. So it's actually being canny and going into a charity relevant to what you're looking at. And they will be very helpful in introducing you to the right individuals and all the rest of it. I think Andy would probably say that too, wouldn't you, Andy Woodhead?
I would. I'm assisting the supervision of two PhD projects on dementia at the moment. And there are two types of study. There are the quantitative ones, and then you've got the qualitative ones, which obviously involve more in-depth interviews with people. But the most difficult thing, and the thing that you have to include, is diversity.
Yep.
And that is a real problem. I don't think any study of dementia, and unless it's looking specifically at one group of individuals, if you're looking at dementia as a whole, it's a real challenge to find diverse groups. I am a gay man, so I can come in with the perspective of what it's like living with dementia in the LGBTQ community and what it's like being in hospital in that group. So there's one type of diversity, but there are so many, religious, ethnic, etc. And you really do need to be thinking about that particular thing when you're putting a research proposal together.
Thank you, Andy. That actually kind of leads on to the next question, which was, what were the most successful ways of engaging a diverse community? So you've kind of half answered that, but are there any sort of tips or successful ways to engage diversity within these communities?
I'll let someone else answer, but what I will say is, because I've sort of half answered the question, it is very, very difficult. It's not easy to engage some groups for various reasons. So it is one of the challenges for a researcher, and I think it's probably one of the most significant challenges, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think over to Shadreck and Meg on that one, I think.
Yeah, I think, Andy, you're right in saying it's challenging, because if it was easy, everybody would be doing it and we wouldn't be having this conversation, really. So I think some of the ways, I think it's perseverance and being creative in the way that you look at your program of work rather than seeing it as a means to an end. You begin to see it as building a relationship, a relationship. Katie said something, I think, on the last slide. There's a point you make about about thinking long term in terms of what you're actually doing, instead of thinking of it as sort of this is what we're going to do, and then we're going to get our research and then we're out of the door. Is what are the practical ways I can help charitable organizations or communities or resource centers, the places that support me? And I have found that way of working opens more doors, that I have to sometimes say I can't reach out to those because I've got no capacity to do all of that. So it's about building relationships and being available, I think, to support other people as much as you want to support yourself with your project.
Thank you, Shadreck. The next question is, how do you fund the community engagement work? And another question linked to that is, are they given recompense for their time on the project?
I can answer that one in that it follows on from, I think Andy Northcott mentioned this earlier. I think we have a range of ways that we support our PPI activity. So absolutely, some is funded through our NIHR studies, but also we do a lot through our institute. So we're very lucky in that University West London is really committed to our research, and they support a lot of our outreach activities as well. So, for example, some of the groups that Shadreck's working with, those charities, they're very, very small charities that are really, it's difficult. So if we can support them with an event every year, it's actually it's fantastic for them. We know we're supporting them in what they're trying to do, but it also helps us to make connections with the community. So we partner with community organisations, particularly local ones, and we use various means, I suppose, in ways to find money to support those programmes. We do use involved rates to support our participants, absolutely.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to sort of merge a couple of questions here. So we've got a question that says, do you have an actual example video of a painting workshop and how it works? And are your workshops underpinned by art therapy practice and research? Are the workshops for data collection or simply an experimental tool to build trust with PPI partners?
I'm going to give that to Meg, but I will also say there's an amazing and actually really, really beautiful film on our website. If you look at the Geller Institute of Aging and Memory website, there's a short film of Meg talking about what she does. It shows her working with people. It's a really, really beautiful little film. But I'll leave Meg to answer that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I think with regards to, is it PPI work or data collection? They are separate things, but in a way they both happen. So I have ethical approval for both, and I think from doing it, really, what I've learned is that the process is so complex, and what you find out is so kind of in depth and detailed that it can be used. There's so much data basically and so much new learning. It can be used for both, and different things can be used in different ways. Was there another question within that, Dawn?
I said, are they underpinned by art therapy practice and research?
Yeah, that was it. I knew there was one.
And there is another question of who keeps the paintings.
Oh, okay. So I'll answer the art therapy one first. So no, it's not underpinned by arts therapy. I guess there's some kind of learning from arts therapy, but arts therapy is very much a kind of a different approach. And the methodological approach that we use is more arts-based methods. With regards to the paintings, that is completely kind of dependent and up to whoever we're working with. So sometimes people want to take them home. Quite often if a care partner and a person living with dementia have done something together, have made a painting together or been in a workshop together, they'll want to keep that, and we're kind of just flexible. other people are happy to, let us keep their artwork. It just completely depends on what that person wants.
Excellent, thanks, Meg.
And Andy
Oh,
had a comment to make. So Andy.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to add that what Megan is doing is really important. We would call them, I guess, some people would call them distraction techniques, but I prefer to call them attraction techniques, particularly when you're looking at the use of restraint and using it less, and of course aligned with what Megan is doing is music therapy, and there's been quite a lot of work on that as well, on groups with dementia, and there's lots of film in that sort of area. I think art less so, but it's very, very important. And as I say, I prefer to call them attraction techniques rather than distraction techniques for people with dementia.
thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
I've got somebody's asked if we're going to be sharing the presentation. You'll be sent a recording of the presentation in the following few days after today. Next question is, when using paintings as a way for people to express themselves, how do you interpret it? Art can be interpreted in many ways, and I wonder how to make sure that you interpret the paintings in the way that the person intended you to, so that their views are reflected appropriately in your research work.
Shall I go with this one? That's a good question and quite a hard question to answer. I think in the broadest sense, it's really important to be aware of the fact that we all interpret things in different ways, and to really try and keep a check on that. There's a lot of observational work that goes, so looking at how people use the paint, how do they work with the paint, how do they appear whilst they're doing that. If people do verbally communicate, that is also all recorded and then transcribed, and it kind of corresponds with the observations. But I think as well, it's about accepting that sometimes you just don't know the reason behind why somebody has painted a yellow mark or whatever that may be, but it's looking at the process as a whole and just trying to find out whatever you can from that. Excellent, thank you, Meg. Just again following on from that one, somebody said, so in a similar theme, is there a particular method of analysis? Is it supplemented by interviewing to understand what the artwork represents? Sometimes, but it's a much more kind of flexible process than that. So for all of the art workshops, people will chat if they want to, and all of that is captured. Sort of in situ interviews really occur. It's never a case of I'll interview somebody after, because it's sort of, that defeats the purpose of it being very much in the moment. But yeah, if people want to speak about it, they will, or sometimes quite often care partners or professional staff who know that person will say something, and then that gives you an insight into why, possibilities of why that person is painting that or using the paint in that way. You kind of just have to absorb everything that's going on within that workshop. Yeah, thank you. Next question is about the picture you shared about the person physically restrained when in hospital. What did you actually do with that picture, and what research did the picture influence, and how? Was it used to feed into a database of anecdotal evidence? Yeah, so that picture is still at the organisation where the workshop took place, and the participant who I work with regularly attends that organisation. So they wanted to keep it. I think with regards to what did it influence, as I mentioned before, everything that we discussed, all the observations have been written up, and that is now feeding into our project, which is looking at the use of restrictive practices in the care of people living with dementia. So we're in the process of writing up the final report. So all these insights that we've got, so from that participant, will be used to provide, understandings into what people's experiences are really, and how they want things to develop or not develop going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Meg. Next question, we've got quite a few. So relationships are with people. So what happens when research projects have staff turnover or terminate?
Oh, I think I'm gonna hand it over to Andy, but I think what's great is we've got a really solid, stable team. We like working together, and luckily we've been able to keep going together. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, and the other thing is these are relationships, so you can't think of your PPI group as a constant source of data. People within the group will move away. Some people will be less interested, some people will be more interested. It's constantly in flux and something that you're going to build on. You don't walk into an organization one day and have your group and that's your group. It's constant work. They're going to leave, people on your side are going to leave, you're reintroducing people, your team's going to change, the makeup of the people you're working with are going to change. And it's not easy, it's hard work, and it's a constant balancing of, just like any relationship, basically. It could be family, friends, partners. It's work, it takes effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy.
Next question, have you looked at music therapy, and there are limited resources in many areas?
Well, I probably hand this one on to Andy as well, but we do use music events. So I'd say a lot of the outreach we do is supporting events that have music that really, I think one of our strengths is that we really see the social isolation of people and go, actually, we can do something about that. We can have, our film events we ran for quite a few years, really supporting people to come to the local arts centre and watch films in a way that actually it's secure, safe, and everybody's welcome. We've done the same with new opera performances. We've done the same with afternoon teas and celebration events where music is a central part of that. So I think it's a really important way of bringing people together and reduce social isolation. And I'll hand over to Andy Woodhead there. Andy, you had something to say? Add to that.
Yeah. We all know about the initiative. It's called Singing for the Brain. I've got to say, when I've gone to some music events, I'm someone who has had early onset dementia. One of the things that I've had to change is the music that they use. Unfortunately, sometimes the musicians consider that the music we want is the sort of music that would be applicable to elderly people, and it's not. We like rock and roll, we like pop. Some people love ABBA, for example. They're even more modern bands. So trying to get variety, I think, into music therapy was one of the things that I had to do. Using a little bit of humour, but I think you just need to make sure that when you do use a particular type of music, then you choose the right group of individuals for that. Call it music genre.
Absolutely. Don't make assumptions. Rosie, over to you.
Just very briefly, to move the music therapy one stage on, I would urge anybody that's on this webinar to look online at something called the Forget Me Not Chorus, of which I've also been very much involved for the last 12 years. And the Forget Me Not Chorus is beyond the singing for the brain because it comes at it from the other direction. Anybody is welcome with dementia and with their carers, and we learn new music all the time. So people that have been actually non-verbal have started to sing again. and we sing pieces from an opera, and they sing it, and they've got Claudio Abbado as one of the principal conductors for us. So in fact, we've got international participants now. It started in Cardiff. There's 4 big choirs in Cardiff, but they are now all over the UK, some in Australia, etc. And last count, I think it was 360 something care homes that also Zoom in. It's a free service. Zoom in to start to learn to sing. So it is a question of, you may have dementia, you may have challenges with your memory. As a carer, you may be absolutely exhausted and really don't know which way to turn. But how about this? Let's sing. And the Royal College of Music and Drama, we have people coming that will not only conduct the choirs, but they will play instruments. So if we need a saxophonist, they get them in. It's great for people's CVs, of course. Saxophonist, cellist, whatever you like. And we have these enormous concerts. Look on the website and see where the nearest one is for wherever you're dialing in from. It's a fantastic organisation.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks, Rosie. I've got, hi, I'm a healthcare professional and currently putting together PPIE roundtable for brain tumour regarding early detection. What PPIE frameworks, templates are useful to document the PPIE activities?
Who wants to answer that one? I would say, again, yes, there are frameworks out there and there are guidance. Absolutely. NIHR has a lot of guidance on how to run events, how to make sure you're being inclusive. But I'd say at the same time, it's, as we've all talked about today, it's about building relationships, taking the time. Don't rush in with the first event where you want people to talk about how to improve things. It's about starting off with relationships and learning about them. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to Andy Woodhead first and then Andy Northcott.
Some of the groups that I've been involved in, what we have is what we call it an icebreaker, really, for the first or second couple of events, just so that we get to know one another. And you'll find whatever the condition is that you're trying to get people to talk about, there is a common language. And dare I say, in dementia, when I talk to someone else who has dementia, they understand the feelings. We understand each other because we know issues like the loneliness of dementia. Even when you live in a house with a lot of people, it can be very lonely. I found it that way during the shutdown because I wasn't able to talk until we developed the online groups. I wasn't able to talk to other people and socialize with them who have dementia. And you're lonely with a group of people simply because they just don't understand what you're telling them and why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And the same would apply, I think, to any self-help group, I would call it, regardless. But icebreakers are always, a good way of getting people to start talking about what is really, let's call it the elephant in the room, which is what we want them to discuss. And that will happen eventually.
Thanks, Andy. And Andy Northcott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I would just say frameworks and things can be helpful, but when you go into this, remember it's co-production, and actually the most interesting things you'll get out of it are the things that you're not expecting to hear. So you're going into work with people, not to have them validate your research question, your idea that you had when you were doing your PhD. So one of the most rewarding and important studies I did with Katie and with Rosie was around continence care for people with dementia in hospitals. And I would have never dreamed that that's a thing I was going to research, because it's just not something I'd thought about when I was doing my PhD, but it just came out as something that was important. And so is that frameworks are important, but it's also the little things to pick up on that people are talking about. That's where you'll find the real nuggets and the real novel research, which is why this co-production is so important.
Exactly. The research, the things we need to be researching, the things that really matter to people. And I think that's the approach you have to take, is you're there to listen and learn and work out what is the thing that is really important to people, what hasn't been researched, where is there no evidence. And that's where talking to people, that will deliver that. That will give you that in the end, but you've got to take your time and build those relationships. That's everything.
Thanks, Katie. I'm not sure if you want to carry on answering the last few questions, or
I think we can if you're okay, yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So did you engage with Join Dementia Research? They're developing an updated package.
Sorry, I didn't hear the first bit.
Sorry, did you engage with Join Dementia Research? They are developing an updated package.
No, we haven't engaged with them. I think I'm on a committee where we talk about that a lot, but I think for us, we enjoy going out and meeting people and making those connections. So I think we've been doing it for quite a long time now. So I think we're okay, but I think absolutely it's an amazing resource. NIHR has some incredible resources to support working with people.
Thank you. Next one. I'm based in practice, but about to start research. I'm really mindful that I feel like my attempts at PPI feel like those with lived experience become the subjects of my research. How do I help with clearer boundaries around this? Got some really good questions.
I think it almost goes back to something. I think I'll probably hand this over to Andy and Rosie, but for me, I think it's about, Andy said earlier that we are a partnership. We collaborate on research. So our PPI participants are not part of the research. They are our partners who are always, I'd say particularly with Andy and Rosie on our steering group, they are checking that we're doing the right thing, that we're doing our research, but they're there to support. But they're there to say, actually, what are we going to do with this research now? How are we going to change things? But it's a partnership. So I think that's where you've got to keep your focus on, in that you're working with people always, it's not a separate group, it's an integral part of your research as partners.
I raised the point that it is a relationship of equals. That's real co-production. And I think you need to go into it really understanding what co-production is not, as well as what co-production is. Co-production is not consultation. That is something completely different. Co-production isn't necessarily just interviewing somebody and getting some feedback. Co-production is really asking people what they want you to talk about, what they want you to research, what they want included. That's real co-production.
Rosie?
I'd also just like to add that we keep on about this partnership, etc., which is so critical. And I'm well aware of governance and obviously all those issues, but I certainly don't see it as a conflict of interest when the group that I meet up with, which by the way does change quite regularly because a number of people are even older than me, but they only leave feet first from the group, and then we have more joining because they're the carers that have now died or they're too ill themselves. But I've been in this game for a long time, and I am still swept off my feet sometimes by what somebody will say in a few short words, and I know that my mouth drops open and I think, well, I've never heard that before, but I think that's critical. And I don't see it as a conflict of interest to phone Katie and say, you'll never guess what, somebody has just said so-and-so. So we line it up either for the next application for funding, or it can go into this current one. Somebody will say, how are you getting on? Oh, well, so and so. And it's absolutely critical. So they all feel very included in this whole partnership. We are all equal, and as I say, sometimes somebody will come out with something and then there's a big discussion, and I have no feeling of conflict of interest at all to feed it into Katie to say, have you considered this, etc.
Yeah, and it keeps us on our toes as well. Absolutely.
On your toes.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rosie. Another question is, would you favour patient focus groups or questionnaires?
I think that falls more into data collection and it's too formal.
Yeah.
I think it's what the kind of key thing we've been saying is there's nothing wrong with focus groups and questionnaires as a method of data collection, but for, as Andy was saying, for co-production, you can't co-produce questionnaire results. It's that relationship building and working in partnership.
Thanks, Andy. And somebody has put, I'm just wondering if formal training and support needs were sought and identified by and for both the academic researchers and those with expertise by experience, or was it informal learning by experience?
I think we've done fairly informal learning, but I think we've learnt from each other. I think that for me is key, is it's, you know, I actually think we gain more. We gain a huge amounts in terms of how PPI, how our partners collaborate and inform our research makes it is incredibly rich and really, really important. I think we gain so much from it as researchers. So I'd really encourage you to invest the time and make those relationships.
Thanks, Katie. And do you use any other techniques for people with dementia who are non-verbal?
I might pass that over to Meg, but I would say the key thing for us is about making sure, I think Andy Woodhead mentioned it earlier, it's about really focusing on who might not have maybe have less access to being part of research or being able to shape research. That's kind of a key thing for us, who might be missing from the table. Meg, do you want to add to anything to that?
No, just what you said, really. It's about trying to find new ways of people expressing themselves, and I think that's particularly important, for people who may not be able to do that in kind of everyday life or more standardized PPI research.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, there's a lot of non-verbal communication with people with dementia who've lost their verbal skills in research in non-verbal techniques to engage with those individuals, understanding if they're agitated, being able to see that the patient with dementia is agitated, and then try and find the reason why. But always a good source of information is the people that are closest to them, which is their families and their carers. But even in that situation where they are non-verbal, whenever I speak to groups of individual students or people who are medical practitioners, I always say, make eye contact with the person that has dementia. Still make eye contact with them. It's a matter of, for me, it's a matter of respect. You make eye contact, obviously, with the carer as well, but you just don't forget that sitting there is someone who's non-verbal, and we don't know how much of what we say they understand, and they do have lucid moments. So that's why I always think eye contact is a really good piece of non-verbal communication. Looking at somebody just shows that you're still interested in them. And somebody mentioned earlier about just touching someone on their back made them feel safe and secure. These are difficult ones. There are safety issues associated with that, and some people may not like it. But there are all sorts of non-verbal ways of getting to know a dementia patient.
People also
Rosie?
learn, who are non-verbal, verbal or non-verbal, also very successfully learn basic signals from Makaton.
All right.
They will learn Makaton and they will use Makaton as they go throughout. And a big project led here in Cardiff called Watch My Needs, which was working with all of those people. In fact, Makaton now have the whole thing. I forgot to tell you, Katie. But it was really sad because OTs were going to take it out into care homes because that's where it was spread mainly. And then COVID came, and of course they were not able to meet in groups, etc. So it's been on hold, but hopefully that will take off again. But Makaton, if you look at somebody who's non-verbal, very often they are actually using basic Makaton signs without realizing they're doing it. Interestingly.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. And I think that for us, it's about inclusion and really thinking through who might be missed, who are the groups you need to include and who need to have a voice in terms of your research. Thanks, Dawn.
So we've got a few more. I'll keep sort of plodding through. So how is the process of consent managed with people with dementia, and what do they think they are consenting for?
I'm going to start off with that just to say it's vitally important that despite whatever people's condition, everybody should have the opportunity to consent to be involved in research and be involved in PPI. Just because someone has a neurodegenerative condition, that doesn't exclude them from participation and involvement. I think that's really, really important. We've written quite a lot in our reports about how to support people in being involved in research, and we probably don't have time to discuss it here unless either of the Andys want to discuss that one. Andy Northcott?
I think we need another hour to go into.
Yeah, exactly. But inclusion is everything.
It's
and
also
that's
I think it is important to think that we're talking about PPI and co-production, and that can be there's the danger of blending data collection and participation in research with partnerships and these informal relationships for building where you should be doing your research, how you're doing your research, how you disseminate your findings, what they mean. And that doesn't always need a signed consent form to take place. You don't need a signed consent form to go and meet a carers group and talk to them about what they think the research issues are. So be careful. Your co-production groups are not your participants. They might become participants in a different study and the lines can become blurred, but primarily they are your research partners. So don't think of them in terms of consent forms, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy.
If I put my lawyer's hat on, I think I mentioned earlier, diversity is probably one of the most difficult issues associated with research. But I think the question that we've just had highlights another extremely difficult one, because there's all sorts of legislation that protects people's privacy and obviously their rights, their human rights. Etc., and obviously data protection. So you do have to be mindful of those issues, but there are ways and means to still be able to involve individuals.
Thanks, Andy. In the longer term, how do the team envisage their research improving patient care in hospitals, and have the team any plans for dissemination within hospital settings or parallel research with clinical staff?
I'd say that is ongoing. We're working hard at it. And I'd say the next part of our the study that's just ending now is working with Andy and Rosie and the team to think about how we co-produce outputs from that. it's a big task. The hospitals are big problems, a lot to do. So we're working on it, but we encourage other research teams to join as well.
Yeah, and it's the reason I do it.
Yeah.
It's the main reason why I do it. That's what gives me the drive to be involved, like I am, for as long as I'm able. I know there will come a time when I can't get involved in these things anymore, but for as long as I can, that's the reason. That and stigma.
Thanks, Andy. Powerfully put.
Indeed. How do you evaluate your co-production activities?
Oh, I think I might give that one to Meg.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I think something that we've been really interested in is looking at, especially within, well, only really sort of speaking from my work, doing arts workshops and working with people in that way. It's about looking at what actually occurs within those art workshops. You know, a lot of research might look at, you know, how is somebody feeling before a session, how is somebody feeling after a session. Whereas I think what we're more interested in is looking at how are they working with the paint? How are we working together? What connection is happening during, say, that hour? So we don't use, well, I haven't used a kind of a more standardized evaluation. It's about looking at what is happening in depth. And I think also another thing that is important is kind of asking and keeping communication with organisations and individuals who you're working with, and keeping a really kind of fluid approach to it. But I think once you've established sort of trust and good working relationships with people, they feel more able to tell you honestly about how they think things have gone. And that's been a really important aspect. So keeping those dialogues going, you know, looking at what is happening within those sessions, but then, also keeping dialogues going and being quite open with each other and getting feedback. And then, you know, I always record that, and you kind of work, and people's needs change, you know, over time. And it's just about constantly communicating with them.
Thanks, Meg. And I think the next few that I've got in here are more kind of points and things that people have shared. So we've had lots of thanks and great presentation coming in as well, which is lovely. But somebody has said they'd highly recommend engaging with the shared learning group for involvement, including their sister group, Charities Research Involvement Group. They've said there's lots of templates, frameworks, best practice guidance, engagement opportunities, and payment funding complexities. And
fantastic, absolutely. I think there's some great resources out there, absolutely.
And then somebody said that they're neurodiverse and a co-lead on a project building partnerships with autistic and learning disabled communities, NIHR funded. I'm the bridge between the community and the academics. We use creative methods, CLAN or CLAPS project. So that's just
brilliant.
Raise. And then PEPS as Therapy is a great organisation. And as an owner of a PAT dog, I can vouch for the benefit of a PAT dog visit in calming an agitated non-verbal person with dementia. Yep, and that's it. We've got through them. That's a lot of questions. So thank you very much, everybody. It was great.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting us. It's been great to be here today and to share what we've been doing. Thank you.
Yeah, a big thank you. A big thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.